On Monday morning, I walked into the bank to withdraw money and help my best friend save his home. But when I handed my ID to the teller, she went pale. "Sir, you no longer control this account." Then my son and daughter-in-law walked in. She threw a folder onto the counter. "You signed the power of attorney. This money isn't yours anymore." I reached for it. She slapped me in front of everyone. "Know your place, old man." The bank fell silent. Then the manager saw the scar on my wrist and froze. "Before we go further, thank you for being here. It genuinely means the world to me. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country. I read every single one. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson it carries is absolutely real. I never thought the day I walked into a bank to help an old friend would be the day my entire world cracked open. It was a Monday morning in September. The kind of morning Charlotte does so well, cool air, carrying just a hint of the coming fall sunlight, cutting clean through the glass towers of Uptown, like it had somewhere important to be. I parked my car 2 blocks from First Meridian Bank, buttoned my jacket against the breeze, and told myself this would take maybe 40 minutes. Walk in, fill out the withdrawal form, transfer the funds to Frank's account, grab a coffee on the way home. Simple. I was 68 years old. I had built a company from the dirt, buried the woman I loved, and learned to make peace with a quiet life. I thought I had already survived the hardest things a man could survive. I was wrong. The lobby of First Meridian Bank smelled the way all serious financial institutions do: cool air, polished marble, and the faint scent of paper money. I took my place in line behind a young woman with a stroller and an older gentleman in a postal uniform. Ordinary people on an ordinary Monday. A ceiling-mounted television played a muted news segment. Somewhere behind the teller windows, a phone rang twice and stopped. When I reached the counter, the teller, a young woman with her hair pinned back, and a small gold nameplate that read Ashley, smiled and asked how she could help me. "I need to make a withdrawal," I said. "A significant one. I'd like to transfer funds to an external account." "Of course, sir. Can I pull up your account?" I slid my ID across the counter. She typed for a moment, frowned slightly at her screen, then typed again. The small frown deepened into something that made my stomach tighten. "Sir, I'm seeing something unusual here," Ashley said carefully, keeping her voice low. "Would you mind waiting just one moment? I need to get a colleague to take a look." "Is there a problem?" "I just want to make sure everything is in order," she said, already turning toward the back office. "I stood at that counter for 4 minutes. I know because I checked my watch twice." The lobby continued its ordinary Monday rhythm around me: printers humming keyboards, clicking a toddler in the stroller, throwing a plastic toy onto the floor with great enthusiasm. I leaned one hand on the counter and thought about Frank, about his voice on the phone last week, tight, with the specific shame of a proud man who had run out of options. Then I heard the door. Not the front entrance, the side door near the premium banking corridor. The sound of 2 sets of footsteps moving with the kind of deliberate pace that does not belong to people who are simply arriving. I turned. Marcus was wearing a charcoal suit I had never seen before. He walked slightly behind Claudia, the way he always did when she was running the room. My son. My 39-year-old son, who had called me just last Sunday to ask if I needed anything from the grocery store. Claudia stepped up to the counter beside me as though I were not there. She set a manila folder down on the marble surface, smooth and practiced, and said to Ashley in a voice that carried just enough to reach the nearest customers, "We're here regarding the Vance account. You'll find the updated authorization documentation in that file." My chest tightened. "Marcus," I said, "what is this?" My son looked at the counter. Not at me. At the counter. "Mr. Vance," Claudia said, turning to face me with the careful expression of someone managing a difficult client. "The account authority was transferred several months ago through a properly executed, durable power of attorney. The paperwork is all in order. I never signed a power of attorney, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I have never signed anything like that. Not for this account. Claudia tilted her head. Her eyes were patient in the way that a surgeon's eyes are patient, not kind, just precise. Elliot, she said, dropping the formal address like she was doing me a favor. Sometimes older adults don't retain full memory of documents they've signed. That's actually one of the reasons this kind of arrangement exists. To protect people. My face went hot. Around us, 2 other tellers had stopped typing. A man in a business suit 2 windows down had gone very still. I am standing in front of you telling you that I did not sign that document, I said. I want to see it. I reached for the folder. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Claudia's right hand came across and struck me across the left side of my face. The sound was sharp and flat and enormous in that marble lobby. The kind of sound that makes time do something strange, stretches it out, so that you notice everything at once. The slight give of my cheek. The ringing that started immediately in my left ear. The collective inhale of every person in that room. Ashley's hand flying to her mouth. Marcus finally looking up and the expression on his face not horror, not regret, just a closed-off blankness that was somehow worse than either. Claudia straightened the cuff of her jacket. You need to know your place, old man, she said. My left hand gripped the edge of the counter. My knees did not buckle, though some part of me registered distantly that they wanted to. The pain in my face was almost secondary. What hit harder, what landed somewhere deeper than bone, was the realization spreading through my chest like cold water. This had been planned. Every detail of this moment. The timing, the paperwork, the public setting, even the words she chose. And Marcus had known. My son had known, and he was standing 3 feet away from me watching it happen. I had raised that boy. I had sat up with him through fevers and nightmares and the terrible Tuesday night in 10th grade, when his best friend moved away, and he cried at the kitchen table like the world was ending. I had put every hope I had into that kid. The sound of footsteps came from the corridor behind the teller stations, quick, decisive, the stride of someone who runs toward problems rather than away from them. A door opened. A man in a dark navy suit stepped into the lobby. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had probably been described as serious since childhood. He took in the scene in less than 3 seconds, the folder on the counter. Claudia's composed expression, the mark beginning to rise on my cheek, and his eyes moved to my face. Then they dropped to my left wrist where my sleeve had pulled back when I grabbed the counter. The man stopped walking. Not the way people stop when they are surprised. The way people stop when they see something that reaches back into a part of them they had stopped expecting to be touched. He stood there for one long breath, staring at the faded scar that runs along the inside of my left wrist. The one I have carried for so long, I forget it is there most days. Then he looked up at my face and something behind his eyes shifted completely. That look on the stranger's face, whatever it was, cracked something open inside me, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, my mind went somewhere else entirely. It went back to the beginning, not because I wanted it to. The mind does strange things when the body is in shock. It reaches for solid ground, for the places where you still knew who you were. And the most solid ground I had ever known started in 1985 with a pickup truck, a set of hand-drawn blueprints, and a woman who believed in me before I had given her a single reason to. Her name was Eleanor May Vance, born Eleanor May Collier, from a small town outside of Asheville, where the air smelled like pine and wood smoke, and her father's particular brand of stubbornness, which she inherited in full. She was 26 when I met her at a construction industry dinner I had no business attending. I had borrowed a friend's blazer and arrived 20 minutes late and sat at the wrong table entirely. She was at that table. She looked at my borrowed jacket, looked at my face and said, "You look like a man with a plan and no idea how to execute it." "I have the plan," I said. I'm working on the rest." She smiled like that was the most reasonable thing she had ever heard. 3 years later, we were married in a small ceremony at a church in Myers Park that we could barely afford to rent for 2 hours. She wore her mother's dress, altered at the waist. I wore the only suit I owned. Neither of us cared. We had a plan. Vance Development Group started in the garage of a rented house on Selwyn Avenue. A folding table, a telephone with a cord that had been chewed by a previous tenant's dog, and a drafting board that Eleanor had found at a yard sale for $12. I did the plans. She did the books. When the first contract came in a small commercial renovation in South End, barely enough to cover 2 months of materials, Eleanor made us a pot of coffee at 11 o'clock at night, sat across from me at that folding table and said, "This is the beginning, Elliot. Don't you dare look at this and see anything other than the beginning." I looked at her across that $12 drafting table and felt like the richest man in Charlotte. Marcus arrived in the spring of 1986, 7 weeks ahead of schedule, and twice as loud as we expected, which was, as it turned out, an accurate preview of the first 8 years of his life. He was the kind of kid who made noise the way other kids breathe, constant, effortless, filling up every room he walked into. By the time he was 6, he was climbing everything I let him near on job sites, wearing a child-sized hard hat that Eleanor had painted yellow with his name on the side. "Is this going to be mine someday, Dad?" he asked once, standing in front of a half-finished office complex in Ballantyne, one hand shielding his eyes from the sun. "One day," I told him. He turned and gave me a grin so wide it used his whole face. "I'm going to make it even bigger." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee thermos. That boy made me proud in ways I never found the words for. He worked summers on crew sites starting at 16, not because I made him, but because he asked. He put himself through UNC Charlotte's business program with the focus of someone twice his age, and when he graduated, he sat between Eleanor and me in those plastic stadium seats in the July heat and held his diploma with both hands like it was something he had built himself. Because he had. When Eleanor got sick, Marcus drove 3 hours through a December snowstorm to sit with her in the hospital because the forecast was bad, and I had begged him not to come. "Dad," he said, when he walked through that hospital door, snow still melting in his hair, "did you really think I was going to stay in Raleigh while Mom was in surgery?" Eleanor cried when she saw him. The good kind of crying, the kind that comes from knowing you are loved past any doubt. She died in February of 2017 on a quiet Thursday morning when the light through the hospital window was the particular pale gold of a winter sunrise. I held her hand. Marcus sat on the other side of the bed, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking in the way of a man trying very hard not to fall apart in front of his father. When she was gone, he looked up at me with red eyes and said, "I don't know how to do this, Dad." "Neither do I said. "We'll figure it out together." We did for a while. We grieved together, rebuilt together. And in the spring of 2019, I sat across from Marcus in my own office, the real office, the corner one on the 14th floor of the Vance Development Group building. The one with the view of Uptown that Eleanor always said looked like a promise, and I handed him the keys. Not literally. There was a ceremony, a board meeting, a stack of legal documents that Simone Arquette, my longtime attorney, had spent 6 weeks preparing. But at the end of it, when the last signature was dry and the room had cleared out, it was just Marcus and me at that long conference table. He looked at the documents in front of him and then looked at me. "You built all of this," he said. His voice was rough. "From nothing. You actually built all of this." "We built it," I said. "Your mother and I. And now it's yours." Marcus pressed his hand flat on the table. Fingers spread the way he used to press his hand into fresh concrete on job sites as a kid to leave his mark. He looked down at his hand for a long moment. "I won't let you down, Dad," he said. "I swear to you I won't let you down." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. Standing in that bank lobby, with the sting still spreading across my left cheek. Those 4 words came back to me like a bell tolling in an empty church, low, resonant, and impossible to unhear. "I won't let you down, Dad." The stranger in the navy suit took one step toward me. His eyes had not moved from my face, but his expression was no longer reading the room, the way a branch manager reads a disturbance on his floor. He was looking at me the way a person looks at something they have spent a very long time searching for, without knowing if they would ever find it. Before I tell you what that man in the navy suit said to me, I need to tell you about Peggy Caldwell. Because the truth is, none of what happened that September morning should have been a surprise. The warning had already come. I just refused to hear it. Peggy lived in the blue-gray colonial directly to the left of my house on Hopedale Road, in Myers Park, close enough that we could wave from our front porches, close enough that she had been the one to bring over a casserole the night Eleanor died and simply set it on my kitchen counter without making me talk about it. She had worked as a legal secretary for 31 years at a firm downtown that handled estate planning and property law. She had a memory like a courthouse filing system and the quiet persistence of someone who had spent 3 decades making sure nothing important fell through the cracks. On a Tuesday morning in early June, she caught up with me on the walking path that loops around the pond at Freedom Park. I was about halfway through my usual circuit, watching a pair of Canada geese argue loudly over a piece of bread someone had thrown near the water's edge when I heard her call my name. "Elliot." She was moving at a clip for a woman of 63, her silver hair pulled back, a small frown already forming between her brows. "I've been hoping to run into you, Peggy." I slowed down and let her fall into step beside me. "You look like you have something on your mind." "I do." She took a breath and smoothed the front of her jacket in the way she did when she was organizing her thoughts. "I saw Marcus and Claudia last Thursday, coming out of a building on Tremont Avenue in South End. I felt nothing particular at that." "All right, Elliot, it was the Whitmore and Associates building. They handle estate and asset transfers, trusts, power of attorney filings, that kind of work." She looked at me directly. "Claudia was carrying a folder with your name on it. I could read it clearly from where I was standing. My feet kept moving on the gravel path, steady and unhurried. "She's a lawyer herself," I said. "It's not unusual for her to meet with colleagues. I heard her talking to Marcus while they were waiting for their car." Peggy's voice dropped, even though there was no one near us. She said, "Once the bank clears this paperwork, it's done." And Marcus said, "It better be. We're out of time." I stopped walking. The geese were still going at it over the bread. A jogger passed us without looking up. "Peggy," I said, as gently as I could manage, "I think you may have misunderstood what you heard. Claudia handles legal work for the company. There are always filings, always transfers. It's the nature of the business." Her jaw tightened just slightly. "I spent 31 years reading documents exactly like the kind they file at that office," she said. "I know what that conversation sounded like. You caught a few words on a sidewalk." I started walking again. "I appreciate you telling me, I really do. But Marcus and I talk every week. If something were going on with my accounts, he would tell me." She matched my pace, and for a moment she did not say anything. Then she put her hand briefly on my arm to stop me. "Elliot." Her voice was tight with something I recognized years later as the specific frustration of a person who can see a car heading toward a wall and cannot make the driver look up. "I hope I'm wrong. I genuinely hope I'm wrong. But please be careful." I patted her hand and told her I would be. 3 weeks later, she knocked on my front door on a weekday afternoon while I was working in the study. I opened the door to find her standing on the porch with a small piece of notepaper folded in half. "I wrote down the date, the address, and what I heard," she said, holding it out. "You don't have to do anything with it, but keep it somewhere." I took the paper. I thanked her. I walked back to my desk, set it in the top drawer beneath a rubber band and a spare house key, and went back to the book I had been reading. I did not think about it again until I was standing in a bank lobby with a handprint rising on my left cheek, wishing with everything I had that I could reach back through time and be the version of myself who read that note and listened. That is the thing about warnings I have learned. They rarely arrive with trumpets. They come in the voice of a neighbor on a gravel path, quiet and specific and easy to dismiss, because listening would mean accepting that the person you trust most in the world might not deserve it. Peggy Caldwell deserved better than what I gave her that morning at Freedom Park. So did I. When I finally pulled myself back to the present, back to the marble lobby, back to the sting across my face, back to the man in the navy suit whose eyes had gone to my wrist and stayed there, I made myself a promise. Whatever came next, I was going to pay attention. I was not going to look away again. The man took another step toward me, and his mouth opened like he had something urgent to say and no idea at all how to begin. I want to stay in that lobby with you a little longer, stay with that man and whatever it was burning behind his eyes. But to understand what I understood later, you need to know about the phone call first. The one that brought me to that bank in the first place. It came on a Thursday night in late August, 2 weeks before everything fell apart. I was sitting in the armchair by the front window. Eleanor's chair, technically, though I had long since stopped thinking of it that way, and started thinking of it as simply the best chair in the house with a glass of sweet tea going warm on the side table, and a copy of a Civil War biography I had been meaning to finish since March. The lamp was on. The neighborhood outside was doing its quiet evening thing, a few dog walkers, the Henderson kid from down the block, coasting past on a bicycle that was too small for him. The phone rang. The screen said Frank Dobbins. I picked up on the second ring, smiling already. Frank and I went back 40 years back to the days when we were both young and broke, and absolutely certain we were going to be rich by 30. He had been a general contractor, tough and reliable and funny in the way that people who have worked hard all their lives tend to be funny, dry, specific, earned. We had drinks every couple of months at a place on Providence Road that neither of us loved, but both of us were too stubborn to suggest changing. "Frank," I said, "it's a Thursday. You never call on Thursdays." There was a pause on the other end that lasted just a beat too long. "Elliot." His voice came out rough, like something had scraped the edges off it. "I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to let me get through the whole thing before you say anything." I sat up straighter. In 40 years, Frank Dobbins had never once asked me to hold my response. "Go ahead," I said. What came out over the next few minutes was the kind of story a proud man tells only when he has absolutely no other choice. The contracting business had been struggling since the pandemic. Jobs drying up, materials costs spiking, the margins on the few contracts he did land barely covering operating costs. His wife Linda had been dealing with a health condition that had chewed through their savings faster than either of them had anticipated. He had taken out a second loan against the house to cover her treatments and keep the business limping along, and now that loan was 3 months past due. "The bank sent a notice last week," Frank said. His voice cracked on the last word just slightly, and I heard him clear his throat hard to cover it. "Formal notice. Elliot, I've lived in that house for 32 years. Linda planted every one of those roses out front herself. I can't let them take it." My chest ached with a weight that had nothing to do with me. "Frank." I kept my voice even because I knew that if I sounded even a little emotional, he would take it as pity, and we would spend the next 10 minutes with him, apologizing for calling. "How much do we need to make this go away?" "Elliot, I'm not asking you to." "I know you're not asking," I said. "I'm offering. How much?" He told me the number. It was significant, but not impossible. I looked across the room at the framed photo of Eleanor on the side table. She was laughing at something off camera, her head tilted back, her whole face lit up, and I thought without any hesitation at all that she would have called Frank herself before waiting for him to call me. I'll be at the bank Monday morning, I said. First thing, the money will be in your account before noon. Frank made a sound that was not quite a word. I heard him breathe in sharply, then out again, long and slow. 40 years, he said finally, his voice thick with something he was clearly fighting to keep under control. 40 years, and you still make it look easy. It's not easy, I said. It's just what you do for people you love. Don't thank me. Buy Linda those tulip bulbs she was talking about last fall and we're square. He laughed at that, a real laugh, wet at the edges, but real. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing important. His grandson's Little League team, a pothole on his street that the city had been ignoring for 3 months, whether the Panthers had any shot this season. By the time we hung up, Frank sounded like Frank again, and I felt the particular quiet satisfaction of a problem solved before it could become a tragedy. I set the phone down on the arm of Eleanor's chair and looked at her photograph. I'm going to help Frank on Monday, I told her. His house, Linda's flowers. You know what she's like about those roses. I could almost hear Eleanor say, "Good. About time he called." I smiled, picked up my biography, and went back to 1863. What I did not know, what I had no possible way of knowing until the trial evidence laid it bare, was that Marcus had already been watching. The forensic records Simone later uncovered told the story plainly. He had accessed Frank's account through the bank systems weeks earlier and knew exactly how desperate things had become. He had been waiting for Frank to call me. That Thursday night, according to phone location data entered into evidence, he was parked at the curb outside my house. The hallway window was open 2 inches. He confirmed what he already suspected: I was going to the bank on Monday. And now he knew exactly how much time he had left. The morning it all came apart started the way every morning had started for the past 6 years, with the smell of coffee and the particular quality of early light that came through the kitchen window at the house on Hopedale Road, and with the habit I could not break of talking to a woman who was no longer there to answer. I was up at 6. The neighborhood was still doing that holding its breath thing it does before the day gets going. Just birdsong and the distant sound of a garbage truck working its way up the next block. I measured out the coffee the way Eleanor had taught me, 2 heaping scoops plus 1 more, because she always said I was stingy with it. And while it brewed, I stood at the kitchen window and watched a mockingbird work through its entire repertoire on the fence post at the edge of the yard. Big plans today, I told it. It ignored me entirely. Fair enough. I carried my mug through to the living room and settled into Eleanor's chair, the wingback by the front window, that she had reupholstered in a deep blue fabric 2 years before she got sick, spending more on that project than she admitted to me until the bill arrived. I picked up the Civil War biography I still had not finished. I read 4 pages. I put it down. The truth is, I was thinking about Frank, about his voice on the phone that Thursday night, that crack in it when he talked about the house, about Linda's roses. In all the decades I had known Frank Dobbins, I had only ever heard him cry once at his father's funeral in 2009, briefly. A single rough sound he covered immediately with a cough that fooled nobody. But the way his voice had gone on that phone call had sat with me all week, the way certain things do a low-level ache just behind the sternum. I was going to fix it today. That felt good. That felt like something solid to hold on to. At 7:30, I went upstairs, showered, and stood in front of the closet for longer than necessary. There was a row of suits on one side, the remnants of 30 years of running a company that required me to look like I ran a company. I did not reach for any of them. I was 68 years old and retired and going to a bank to help a friend, not to impress anyone. I put on a pair of gray slacks, a blue button-down Eleanor had given me for a birthday several years back, and a jacket that was comfortable and not remarkable. I looked at myself in the mirror over the dresser. An old man looked back. Gray at the temples, a few more lines than I remembered, hands that showed 30 years of construction sites, even after years of office work. I did not look like the founder of a company worth $180 million. I looked like someone's grandfather, which I was not yet, and someone's father, which I very much was, though that particular fact was sitting differently in my chest than it had a week ago. I turned away from the mirror and picked up the small notebook from the nightstand where I had written Frank's account information. On my way out, I stopped in front of Eleanor's photograph on the living room shelf, the one I knew by heart, and I felt the familiar mix of warmth and ache that had become as much a part of my mornings as the coffee. "Going to help Frank today," I told her. "Shouldn't take long. I'll be back before lunch." I swear sometimes the house answers when I talk to her like that. A settle of wood, a shift of air. Something that feels, if I don't examine it too hard, like acknowledgement. I locked the front door, walked to the car, and backed out of the driveway onto Hopedale Road. The drive to Uptown took 22 minutes. Charlotte was doing its September best, that particular stretch of early fall when the heat breaks and the sky goes a deep, clean blue that makes you remember why you chose this city. I found parking on Tryon Street 2 blocks from the bank, fed the meter, and walked the rest of the way with my notebook in my jacket pocket and absolutely nothing in my mind that resembled worry. I called Frank from the sidewalk outside First Meridian Bank just to let him know I was there. He picked up on the first ring. "Elliot." His voice was different from Thursday, lighter. "You really came." "Did you think I wouldn't?" I said. "I don't know." He laughed a little unsteady. "Part of me kept thinking I'd dreamed that phone call." "You didn't dream it," I said. "I'll call you when it's done. Go have breakfast. Stop worrying, Elliot." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone rough in a completely different way than Thursday. The Thursday roughness was shame. This was something else, the specific rawness of a man who has been shown that he is not as alone as he feared. "Thank you. I mean it. Thank you." My throat tightened slightly. 40 years, Frank. That's what it's for. I hung up, straightened my jacket, and walked through the glass doors of First Meridian Bank into the cool, marble-floored lobby that smelled of circulated air and quiet money. I had no idea in that moment that on the other side of the street, a dark sedan was parked at the curb, with its engine idling. I had no idea that Marcus was in the passenger seat, checking his phone, or that Claudia was in the driver's seat, watching the bank entrance, with the focused patience of a woman who had been planning this for a very long time. Everything I needed to know had been sitting in Frank's phone the entire time. I just hadn't thought to look. But right then, I was just a man walking into a bank on a September morning to help his oldest friend keep his house. And for exactly as long as it took me to cross that lobby and reach the teller line, the world was still entirely ordinary. The man in the navy suit was Derek Holloway, branch manager of First Meridian Bank's Uptown Charlotte location, and in approximately 45 seconds, he was going to change the entire shape of my life. I did not know that yet. All I knew was that he had walked out of the corridor behind the teller stations with the calm authority of someone accustomed to being the most competent person in any room he entered, taken one look at the situation in his lobby, and then looked at my wrist and stopped moving entirely. The lobby was still frozen in that awful collective held breath that had followed the sound of the slap. Claudia had her folder pressed to her chest like a shield. Marcus was staring at a point somewhere near the base of the marble counter, with the careful focus of a man trying to disappear by willpower alone. 2 tellers had pushed their chairs back slightly from their stations. A woman near the door with a leather portfolio under her arm had her hand pressed flat against her collarbone. Derek took one slow step toward me. His eyes moved up from my wrist to my face, and what was in them stopped me cold, not the professional assessment of a manager evaluating a disturbance, but something raw, something that came from much further back than this lobby, this morning, this marble floor. "Sir," he said, his voice lower than the room required, "is that scar on your left wrist from an accident on Independence Boulevard around 20 years ago?" My mouth opened. No sound came out for a moment, which was unusual for me. "How in the world would you know that?" I said. Something crossed Derek's face that I can only describe as a man watching a door open that he had stopped expecting to ever find. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared slightly, and then his eyes went bright in a way that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lighting. "Because I was there," he said. "I was the one on the sidewalk." The lobby had been quiet before. Now it went completely still, the way a room does when something shifts, that everyone present can feel even if they don't understand it. I looked at him. Really looked at him, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the set of his jaw, the broad shoulders of a man who had built himself into something solid over decades. Somewhere under the Navy suit and the authority and the 44 years of living, I searched for the college kid I had seen exactly once on a rain-soaked sidewalk on a Tuesday night in October 2005. "The bicycle," I said slowly. Derek pressed his lips together hard and nodded once, and his eyes went glassy at the edges, in the way of a man who has rehearsed staying composed through this moment so many times that the rehearsal was finally catastrophically not enough. "A delivery truck ran a red light," he said, his voice controlled by pure effort. "I went over the handlebars. My phone was broken. It was raining so hard I could barely see the streetlights. People drove past for I don't know how long. And then you stopped." My chest was doing something complicated. The scar on my wrist was from a piece of the bicycle frame, a jagged piece of aluminum that had cut through when I pulled the kid clear of the curb, though I had not thought about it in years. You do not catalog the things you do in moments like that. You just do them and move on. "You went to the hospital with me," Derek continued, and now his voice had dropped to something barely above a murmur. "You stayed until they took me in. When I woke up after surgery, the nurse told me the bill had been taken care of. I asked for your name, and she said you didn't leave one." "I didn't think it was necessary," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended because my throat had gone tight. "And then 6 months later, I got an envelope in the mail." Derek stopped and pressed 2 fingers briefly to the bridge of his nose, collecting himself. "No return address. Enough to cover my last 2 years of tuition. I carried that envelope to my dorm room, and I sat on the floor, and I cried like I was 12 years old." He looked up at me, his eyes red at the rims. "I have been looking for you for 20 years, Mr. Vance. I never found you. I had your face and that scar and nothing else." My hand had come up to my chest without my realizing it. My heart was hammering against my palm. "Derek," I managed. 20 years, he said, and his voice finally broke on the second word. Just slightly, just a fracture. But I heard it and felt it somewhere behind my ribs, like a string pulled too tight. "You changed the entire direction of my life. I graduated. I got this job. I have a wife and 2 kids and a house in Plaza Midwood because of what you did on that sidewalk. Because you stopped." Claudia made a sound, some clipped, impatient syllable, and moved as if to interrupt. Derek turned and looked at her, and whatever he had been managing to keep, contained behind his professional exterior, crystallized in that moment into something clear and hard and completely immovable. "Ma'am," he said, his voice shifting into a register. I suspected he reserved for situations where politeness had reached its absolute limit. "I am going to need you and your husband to remain in this building. I am placing a temporary hold on all transactions associated with this account, pending a compliance review. That is my authority as branch manager, and it is not negotiable." Claudia's eyes narrowed. "You don't have the standing to—" "I have every standing to freeze a transaction when I have reason to believe the documentation may be irregular," Derek said. "And I have considerable reason." He looked back at me and his voice came down again, warm and direct. "Mr. Vance, would you please come with me to my office?" My legs felt unsteady under me, not from the slap, though my cheek was still burning, but from the accumulated weight of the last 20 minutes and the staggering, disorienting grace of what had just happened. In the middle of the worst morning of my life, the universe had placed the one person who had both the authority and the reason to stand between me and what Marcus and Claudia had built. I straightened my jacket. I looked at my son one more time. Marcus had finally raised his eyes from the counter, and he was staring at Derek with an expression I had never seen on his face before, the look of a man watching his carefully constructed architecture develop its first crack. "Yes," I said to Derek, "lead the way." Derek's office was the kind of room that told you exactly who he was before he said a word. A dark wood desk kept so clean it looked like he wiped it down between meetings. A framed degree from UNC, Charlotte on the wall, centered with the precision of a man who understood that details matter. And on the corner of the desk, a small photograph in a plain silver frame showing a woman and two young kids on what looked like a hiking trail somewhere in the Blue Ridge. A family. A life. Built brick by brick from what looked like nothing. He closed the door behind us, turned the privacy latch, and said something through the glass partition to his assistant that I could not hear. Then he came around the desk, sat down across from me, rather than behind it, close direct, no barrier between us, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "A real one, not the professional version." "Take your time," I said, though my cheek was still hot, and my heart had not fully settled since the lobby. Derek took a breath that he held for one deliberate second before releasing it. "October 14th, 2005, he began. "I was 21 years old, junior year at UNC Charlotte. I was working a double shift at a restaurant in South End to cover my tuition payment that was due that Friday. It was close to 11 at night when I got off. I was riding my bicycle home because I couldn't afford a car." He stopped, rubbed one hand briefly along his jaw. "I know Independence Boulevard well enough now that I always slow at that intersection. Back then I trusted the green light." He looked down at his hands. "The delivery truck came through the red so fast I didn't even hear it," he said. I was there, and then I was on the ground, and the bicycle was in pieces, and the truck was gone. My left leg was broken in 2 places. I had a cut on my head that was bleeding badly enough that I couldn't see clearly. My phone had shattered when I hit the pavement." His voice was steady, but only the way a man's voice is steady when he has told a story so many times in his own head that he has learned to carry it without flinching. "Cars kept going past," he said. "I was on the sidewalk, not in the road, so nobody was in danger from me. I was just there, wet and bleeding and completely alone, and I remember thinking that I was going to have to drag myself to the bus stop and hope someone came by." He looked up at me and his eyes had gone wet at the corners again. "And then a car slowed down, and a man got out in the rain without hesitating even a little bit. He came straight to me and crouched down and said, 'Hey, I got you. Don't try to move.' My chest ached with a recognition that surprised me. I remembered the rain that night, October rain in Charlotte, cold and serious. I remembered the kid on the sidewalk. I had been driving home late from a job site review and seen him from the road, seen the broken bicycle turned around without thinking twice. That was me, I said quietly. I remember the bicycle. I remember the rain. Derek pressed his lips together hard and nodded. His jaw was working. You rode in the ambulance with me, he said. You stayed in the waiting room while they took me into surgery. I was out for 3 hours. When I woke up, the nurse said the man who brought me in had taken care of the bill and asked them to tell me to focus on getting better. He stopped, swallowed. She said you didn't leave a name. It didn't seem like necessary information, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to, because my throat had gone tight enough to hurt. 6 months later. Derek continued, and now his voice cracked fully on the first word, and he did not try to hide it. I got a plain envelope in my campus mailbox. No return address. Inside was a cashier's check for $19,000. enough to cover my remaining tuition and have a little left over for books and rent. He stopped talking entirely for a moment and pressed the back of his hand hard against his mouth, collecting himself with visible effort. His eyes were full. I sat down on the floor of my dorm room hallway, and I sobbed. Not cried, sobbed, like a little kid. My roommate found me there 20 minutes later and thought something terrible had happened. "Derek," I started, "something wonderful had happened." He said, his voice unsteady but fierce. "Mr. Vance Elliott, I graduated because of you. I got this job, I met my wife, I have those 2 kids in that picture, because I was able to stay in school." He leaned forward, and there were tears tracking down his face now that he was no longer trying to stop. "I have spent 20 years hoping I would find you. I had your face in my memory, and that scar and nothing else. I looked, I genuinely looked, and I stopped looking about 3 years ago because I thought I never would." I reached across and put my hand on his forearm, and my own eyes burned in a way I had not expected. "I did what any decent person would have done," I said. "No," Derek said sharply, shaking his head with real conviction. "No, you did not. I was on that sidewalk for almost 30 minutes before you stopped. Decent people drove past me. You stopped and got out in the rain and stayed. That is not any decent person. That is you." I did not have words for what that landed like. I just sat with it, with the weight of it, with the strange grace of finding out at 68 years old that something you barely remembered doing had built an entire life in its wake. Derek straightened. He pulled in a long breath, wiped his face with the back of his hand, without any self-consciousness about it, and then something shifted in his posture, the grief and gratitude folding back to make room for something harder and cleaner. "Now," he set his voice back to level, "I need you to tell me everything that happened to bring you to that teller window this morning. Because what I saw in that lobby is not a misunderstanding. And whoever did that to you in my bank is going to find out that they chose the wrong building." Derek did not waste time after that. He straightened his jacket, picked up his desk phone, and made 2 calls in quick succession, the first to his assistant to pull every transaction record associated with my account, going back 18 months, the second to the compliance officer on duty to flag the account for internal review. His voice on both calls was crisp and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been managing serious situations for long enough that seriousness no longer rattled him. When he hung up, he looked at me across the desk. "I want to look at that power of attorney document Claudia presented," he said. "The actual paper, not a copy." "She has it," I said. "She left it at the teller window when I redirected everyone," Derek said. "Ashley secured it." He stood up. "Come with me. I want you to see this in real time." We moved to a back office, a room I had never been in before, and hoped to never be in again under similar circumstances, all fluorescent light and file cabinets, and the particular sterile smell of paper handled by 1,000 careful hands. A young woman named Ashley, the same teller, who had first flagged my account, brought in a folder and set it on the table with the careful movements of someone who understood she was handling something that mattered. Derek put on a pair of reading glasses, opened the folder, and set the power of attorney document on the table. Then he went to the filing cabinet, pulled my original account file, found the signature card I had completed when I first opened the account 11 years ago, and laid it directly beside the new document. He looked at both for 30 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Elliot, look at the capital V in Vance." I leaned in. On my original signature card, the V in Vance started with a downward stroke that swept left before climbing a habit from my father's handwriting that I had absorbed without ever noticing it. On the power of attorney document, the V climbed straight up, same shape at a glance, completely different architecture underneath. "That's not my signature," I said. My voice came out flat because the alternative was something I was not ready for in a fluorescent-lit back office. "No," Derek said quietly, and without any satisfaction at all. It is not. He picked up the phone on the desk and dialed an extension. Russell, he said, I need you in the back compliance room. Right now, please. We waited 4 minutes. I know because I watched the second hand on the wall clock make 4 full rotations, while Derek methodically went through the rest of the transaction, history making small marks in pencil on a yellow legal pad. Dates, amounts, account numbers. The kind of notes a careful man makes when he is building something that needs to hold up later. The door opened and Russell Patton walked in. He was younger than I expected, early 30s, with the kind of face that probably still got carded occasionally dark circles under his eyes that suggested either a new baby at home or a conscience that had not been sleeping well. He was wearing the standard bank employee dress code, a white shirt and dark slacks, and he was carrying a coffee mug that he set down the moment he registered who was sitting at the table. His eyes went to me, and something happened in them that I clocked immediately, a flinch that was not quite physical, a tightening around the jaw that a person does when they recognize a situation they have been dreading. Russell, Derek said, his tone even and professional. This is Mr. Elliot Vance. He is the primary account holder on the account flagged this morning. I need to ask you some questions about the modification history on that account over the last 6 months. Russell set his shoulders carefully. Of course, he said. Walk me through the authorization change that came through in March, Derek said. Who initiated it, who processed it, and what documentation was presented at the time? Russell answered in the measured cadence of someone reciting information. He has organized in his head dates. Document types the name of the supervising officer who had co-signed the processing. It was all technically correct. It was all entirely procedural. But there was something underneath the procedural correctness, a tension in his answers that had nothing to do with the content and everything to do with the gaps between the words. Derek let him finish. Then he asked very quietly, who physically brought the documentation in Russell? Was it mailed, faxed, or hand-delivered? Russell's hand found the handle of his coffee mug. His knuckles went slightly pale. Hand-delivered, he said. By whom? The clock on the wall made 2 full rotations in the time it took Russell to answer. His jaw worked once the way a person's does when they are deciding something that cannot be undecided. By Mrs. Vance, he said finally. Claudia Vance. She came in on a Thursday afternoon with the full package. Was Mr. Elliot Vance present at any point during the processing? Derek asked. Russell's eyes dropped to the table. A muscle in his temple twitched. No, he said. He was not. Derek wrote something on his legal pad. The scratch of pencil on paper was the loudest sound in the room. Thank you, Russell, Derek said. Please don't discuss this conversation with anyone until I come back to you. That includes other staff. Russell picked up his coffee mug. His hand was not steady. He looked at me once more before he turned to go, and what was in his eyes in that moment? I had seen that look before in my life in the eyes of men standing at forks in roads they had not expected to reach. He was carrying something, and it was getting heavier. Derek, I said after the door had closed. I know, Derek said without looking up from the legal pad. He knows more than he just told us. Before I show you exactly where Elliot's money disappeared to, and trust me, what Derek found in those records will make your blood run cold, I need to know you're still with me. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just a single number, that's all. It tells me you're here, and it means more to me than you know. One more thing before we continue. The story ahead carries some fictional elements shaped to make the message land deeper. If that's not something you'd like to hear, this is a perfectly good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. Derek closed the door after Russell left and stood with his hand still resting on the handle, his back to me for just a moment, long enough for me to see his shoulders rise and fall, with a single slow breath, the way a man breathes when he is about to deliver news he wishes he did not have to deliver. Then he turned around and looked at me straight. I need to show you something else, he said. And I need you to be ready for it, because what I am about to put on that screen is worse than the signature. My stomach dropped like a stone. Show me, I said. He sat back down, pulled the second monitor to face both of us, and typed in his credentials with the focused efficiency of a man who has done this kind of work long enough that his hands do not hesitate, even when his chest does. The screen populated with a transaction history, 18 months of dates, dollar amounts, property reference codes, account numbers running in tight columns down the page. He scrolled slowly, deliberately, giving my eyes time to follow. These 3 clusters, he said, moving the cursor to highlight entries spread across January through September of this year. I cross-referenced them with the Mecklenburg County Property Registry and the Federal Business Entity Database. 3 commercial properties, all recorded in your name as of 20 months ago, all transferred out within the past 9 months to separate entities. Transferred to whom? I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me because nothing else in my body felt steady at all. 3 limited liability companies, Derek said, leaning forward and pointing to each entry in turn. Crestline Capital Partners, Blue Ridge Asset Holdings, Meridian Property Solutions, all 3 registered in Delaware, which is a common choice for shell companies, specifically because Delaware requires almost no public disclosure about ownership. You can set one up in a day, name anyone you want as the registered agent, and the paper trail stops there unless someone knows exactly where to pull. He paused. All 3 share a registered agent address in Miami, Florida. The air in the room went thin. I pressed both hands flat on the desk because the alternative was watching them shake. Those 3 properties, I said, hearing my own voice as though from a slight distance. Those are personal holdings. Nothing to do with Vance Development. I kept them specifically separate when I handed Marcus the company. I know, Derek said. That is precisely why they appear on this list instead of in the company records. Whoever structured this knew the difference and targeted your personal assets deliberately. He pulled up a second screen without waiting for me to respond, smooth, methodical, the way a surgeon moves when there is more to be done and sentiment has to wait. This is where it compounds. He pointed to a series of entries dated 14 months back. Vance Development Group secured a private investment loan approximately 14 months ago from a fund called Coastal Meridian Equity Partners, based out of Miami. The loan amount was significant, north of $40 million. The collateral listed in the loan agreement includes 2 of the same 3 commercial properties we just discussed. Your personal properties, Elliot, used as collateral for a company loan without your knowledge. I pushed back from the desk. I stood up because sitting had become physically impossible. I walked to the window and put one hand against the glass and looked out at uptown Charlotte in the flat afternoon light, the towers, the streets, the skyline that I had spent 30 years helping to build. 3 of those buildings had Vance fingerprints in their foundations. I knew the names of the crews who had poured the concrete. I knew the inspectors. I knew the subcontractors. I had stood in hard hats at groundbreaking ceremonies and felt something that I am not ashamed to call pride. He lost money in Miami, I said. It did not come out as a question because it was not one. The project is significantly underwater, Derek said, and his voice was careful and quiet and respectful in the way a voice gets when it is carrying someone else's devastation. Based on the financial indicators I can access through our systems, the loss exposure on that Miami project is substantial. The 40 million figure appears to be a floor, not a ceiling. I turned back from the window. My chest felt like someone had reached through my ribs and was slowly, methodically squeezing everything inside. 30 years. Every bid won on thin margins. Every payroll met. Every project finished on time because I had refused to let the company be anything other than what Eleanor and I had decided it would be on that $12 drafting table in a rented garage. He needed to cover the loss before the board of directors discovered it, I said. That interpretation is consistent with everything I am looking at, Derek said. He was watching me with an attention that was neither clinical nor pitying, just present steady, the attention of a man who understood that the moment after terrible news is as important as the news itself. Elliot, I need to ask you something directly, and I need a direct answer. Ask it. Do you have an attorney? Someone who specifically handles asset fraud and civil litigation. Because what is on these screens is beyond the scope of what a bank compliance review can address. This needs legal counsel involved today, not at the end of the week. Not tomorrow morning as a preference, today, this evening, as a necessity. Simone Arquette came to mind immediately and completely. Sharp as a blade, patient as a stone, the woman who had spent 6 weeks preparing the transfer documents when I handed Marcus the company, and who had told me on the day everything was signed, without any particular emotion, but with absolute clarity. Hulse me if you ever need me, Elliot. Any hour. No qualification on that offer. Yes, I said. I have exactly the right person. Call her the moment you leave this building, Derek said. He opened his desk drawer, took out a plain manila envelope, and began printing the transaction records, 3 pages clean, copies each one dated and time-stamped by the system. He slid them into the envelope and held it out to me across the desk. I took it. The paper inside should have weighed almost nothing. It felt like it weighed 30 years. Derek. My voice had gone rough at the edges in a way I could not smooth out. I don't have words for what you did today. Any of it. Not just the investigation. All of it. Derek stood up and extended his hand across the desk. His grip was firm and warm and held just a second longer than a professional handshake requires. 20 years ago, you got out of a car in the rain for a stranger, he said. Today, I got out from behind my desk for you. We are nowhere near even. He released my hand. Now go call your attorney. And Elliot, whatever you find out from here, you are not going to face it alone. I tucked the envelope under my arm, straightened my jacket, and walked out of First Meridian Bank into the September afternoon with the particular heaviness of a man who has just learned that the walls he trusted most had been hollow the entire time. I drove home from the bank that evening, the way a man drives when his hands know the route well enough that his mind is free to go somewhere else entirely, and mine went somewhere I had been avoiding all afternoon. It went to Marcus. Not the Marcus who had stood in that lobby this morning in his charcoal suit, watching his wife raise her hand against his father without making a single move to stop it. That Marcus I did not yet know how to think about, without something dangerous rising in my chest. I went instead to the other one, the one I had known for 39 years, the one I had built everything for. I unlocked the front door of the house on Hopedale Road and stepped inside and stood in the hallway, with Derek's envelope still pressed under my arm. The house settling quietly around me in the early evening. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I found the lamp in the living room by habit, turned it to its lowest setting, and pulled the old photo album from the shelf beneath the side table, the one I had not opened since the winter Eleanor died, and sat down in her chair. The first photograph was Marcus at age 7, standing on the worksite of what would become our first major commercial project in Noda. Hard hat sliding down over his forehead, fists on his hips, chin tilted up with the complete confidence of a child who has decided he owns whatever he is looking at. I remembered that afternoon. I remembered reaching down to straighten that hat and him batting my hand away with enormous dignity and saying, "Dad, I got it." Then looking up at me with those bright eyes and grinning. When I'm the boss, I'm going to have the biggest hard hat on the whole site. I had laughed until my chest hurt. I touched the edge of that photograph, and my throat tightened so fast it actually ached. "Where did you go?" I said out loud to that 7-year-old face. "I need you to tell me where you went." I turned the pages slowly. Marcus at 12 sitting beside Eleanor in the bleachers at a company picnic, his head leaned against her shoulder, her arm around him, both of them laughing at something off camera with their whole faces, the way that certain people laugh completely, without holding anything back. Marcus, at his high school graduation, pumping his fist at the camera because he had just found out his GPA qualified him for the Business Honors Program at UNC Charlotte. Marcus, at 22, on graduation day, holding his diploma in both hands, squinting into the July sun. And in the front row, Eleanor and I were standing with tears running freely down our faces, and not a single thing to be embarrassed about. I found the photograph from Eleanor's last hospital stay. A nurse had taken it without being asked. Slipped it into my hand when I left that day without saying anything. Marcus was in the chair beside her bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his head bowed low, his shoulders shaking in the controlled, desperate way of a man fighting with everything he has to keep grief from becoming something he cannot pull back from. Eleanor's hand rested in his hair, her eyes were closed and her lips were curved just slightly, the way they curved when she was at peace, when she knew the people she loved were near. My hand started shaking so badly, I had to set the album down on my knee and press it flat. "She told me to take care of you," I said to the photograph. My voice cracked completely on the last two words, and I did not try to stop it. "Her last real words about you. She said you needed me more than I thought." I stopped, breathed hard, tried again. "What did you need, Marcus, and what did you need that you couldn't come to me and ask for $40 million in losses, and you thought the answer was to take what your mother and I spent 30 years building? You thought that was better than a phone call." My eyes were burning so badly, I could barely see the photograph. I pressed the back of my wrist hard against them and held it there, chest heaving, trying to get enough air. The thing about this kind of betrayal, I understand now, is that it does not arrive clean. It does not arrive as simple anger, which would almost be easier. It arrives tangled up with everything else. With the memory of the kid who batted my hand away from his hard hat. With the young man who drove 3 hours through a December snowstorm because his mother was in surgery and no forecast was going to keep him away. With the son who stood in my office on the day I gave him the company and pressed his palm flat on that conference table and said, "I won't let you down, Dad. I swear to you." How do you hold all of those things at once? How do you grieve a person who is still alive and standing in a bank lobby watching someone hurt you? I do not have a clean answer for that. I still do not. My phone rang at 11:47. I had been watching the clock on the mantel for over an hour, unable to sleep, unwilling to move from Eleanor's chair. Simone Arquette. I picked up on the second ring, my hand still unsteady. "Elliot." Her voice came through the line with the specific gravity of a woman who has looked at a legal situation and immediately categorized it as serious. No pleasantries, no preamble, just her name for me, and then, "I have gone through everything Derek forwarded tonight. All of it. I need you in my office tomorrow morning at 7:30. Not 8, 7:30. "I'll be there," I said. "Good." A brief pause. Then with a shift in her voice that was small but real. "Elliot, I want to tell you 2 things before I let you go. The first is that we have a strong case. A genuinely strong case. What Derek found today is exactly the kind of documented evidence that holds up." Another pause. "The second thing is that what I found on my end tonight, going deeper into the filings, is more extensive than what Derek was able to see from the bank's side. I want you to be prepared for that." My hand tightened around the phone until the knuckles went white. "How much more extensive?" I asked, my voice barely above a rough whisper. "We go through it properly in the morning," she said firmly, "with documents in front of us and daylight outside. Tonight you rest. Or you try to." The smallest softening in her tone, just enough to hear. "You are not in this alone. That is not a thing I say to clients. That is a thing I mean." I thanked her and set the phone down. I looked at Eleanor's photograph across the room, at the face I had loved for 40 years. "I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring," I told her, my voice worn thin and quiet. "But I'm going to face it. Whatever it is, I'm going to face it the way you would want me to. I sat in that chair holding the photo album against my chest until nearly 2 in the morning, listening to the house breathe around me, waiting for the dawn. Simone Arquette's office occupied the 12th floor of a building on Tryon Street in Midtown Charlotte, and at 7:29 that Tuesday morning, I stepped out of the elevator into a reception area that smelled of fresh coffee and serious work, the particular combination of scents that belongs to offices where important things get decided before most people have finished breakfast. Simone was already at the conference room table when her assistant showed me in. She was 62, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had settled into something better than pretty, precise, composed, carrying the specific authority of a woman who had spent 30 years in courtrooms and stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. 3 accordion folders sat open on the table in front of her. A legal pad covered in her handwriting lay to the left. 2 cups of coffee steamed on a tray. She looked up when I walked in and said without preamble, "Sit down, Elliot. There is a lot to cover and I want to get through all of it before you ask questions, because some of what I tell you early will answer questions you would otherwise ask later." I sat. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. My hands needed something to hold. "I am going to walk you through 3 layers," Simone said, opening the first accordion folder. Marcus built the financial layer. Claudia built the legal layer. Together they built a 3rd layer designed to make sure that even if the first 2 were challenged, you would not be believed. She set a document on the table and turned it to face me. "This is the durable power of attorney that Claudia presented at the bank yesterday. A durable POA in North Carolina must be signed by the principal, that is you, in the presence of a licensed notary public and 2 witnesses. The notary stamp on this document belongs to a man named Gerald Whitfield, who surrendered his notary commission 14 months ago following an unrelated licensing complaint. He no longer has legal authority to notarize anything in this state." My jaw tightened. "Meaning the notarization is invalid. Meaning the document is void on its face," Simone said flatly. "It would not survive 10 minutes of scrutiny from any competent judge. Claudia knows that, which is why she built the 3rd layer." She reached into the 2nd folder and set another document on the table. 8 pages stapled with a medical letterhead at the top that I did not recognize. This was filed with a private legal trust management firm in Raleigh 4 months ago. It is a neuropsychological evaluation report, a formal cognitive capacity assessment, concluding that you demonstrate moderate early-stage cognitive decline consistent with impaired financial decision-making. I stared at my name at the top of that report. Elliot James Vance. Date of birth. Address. And below that 8 pages of clinical language describing a man who was losing his grip on reality. "I have never seen this doctor in my life," I said. My voice came out low and tight like something had its hand around my throat. "I know," Simone said. "The physician who signed this report, a Dr. Harold Fenwick, operates a private neuropsychology practice in Raleigh. I made 3 calls last night. Dr. Fenwick has never billed your insurance, never requested your medical records, and according to his own office manager, who was very forthcoming at 6:30 in the morning when I explained what I was investigating, has no appointment record for you at any point in the last 5 years." She leaned forward. "What he does have is a history of accepting referrals from a specific legal consulting firm that Claudia has used on 2 previous cases. He signed the report based on a fabricated patient file that Claudia's team assembled. He examined nothing. He met no one. He signed his name and collected a fee." My hands started shaking around the coffee cup. I set it down before I spilled it. "She built a paper version of me," I said. "A version that was losing his mind, so that if I ever tried to fight back, any court would be presented with a licensed physician's report saying you were not competent to manage your own affairs at the time the transactions occurred. Simone said. Combined with the durable POA, the asset transfers, and the collateral filings, the legal argument would be that Marcus and Claudia were not stealing from you. They were managing assets on behalf of a man who could no longer manage them himself. She sat back. It is one of the most thoroughly constructed elder financial abuse cases I have seen in 30 years of practice. The financial motive is Marcus. The legal architecture is entirely Claudia. She is exceptionally good at what she does. The word good landed in my chest like something sharp. What do we do? I asked. My voice had steadied itself through sheer effort the way a building steadies itself against wind, not because the wind has stopped, but because the structure has decided to hold. We dismantle it the same way she built it, Simone said, and there was something in her voice now, not satisfaction, not excitement, just the quiet certainty of a woman who has identified exactly what needs to be done and has no intention of stopping until it is finished. Layer by layer, the notarization is already invalid. Dr. Fenwick's report will not survive a subpoena and a deposition. The asset transfers are traceable. The shell companies are findable. She began stacking the documents back into their folders in precise, deliberate movements. Derek is your most important ally right now. His testimony about the signature comparison alone is significant. And Russell Patton, she looked up at me. If he decides to talk fully, this case closes faster than Marcus and Claudia will be ready for. I nodded, my chest still tight, my hands still not entirely steady. Simone, I said, tell me honestly, can we win this? She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses, with the expression of a woman who has been asked that question many times and has learned to answer it exactly once per client. Elliot, she said, I do not take cases I do not intend to win. Then Derek's phone number lit up her screen, and she picked it up, and the expression that crossed her face in the next 4 seconds told me that whatever came next, it was not going to be simple. Simone listened to Derek for 47 seconds without saying a word, which told me more about the severity of what he was saying than any expression on her face could have. When a woman who argues cases for a living goes 47 seconds without speaking, the news is serious. She set the phone on the table on speaker and said, Derek Elliott is with me. Tell him directly. Derek's voice came through the speaker with the measured control of a man who has already processed the worst of his own reaction and is now just transmitting information. Marcus was waiting for me in the parking garage this morning, Derek said. I came down to get my car at 7:15 and he was standing by the elevator, not sitting in a vehicle, standing, like he had been there a while. My stomach clenched hard. What did he say? I asked. He was very pleasant about it, Derek said. And the way he said pleasant made it sound like the most dangerous word in the English language. He shook my hand. He said he understood there had been some confusion at the bank yesterday, and he wanted to address it personally before things escalated unnecessarily. He said he had always respected me as a professional, and he hoped that respect was mutual. A pause. Then he mentioned the internal audit from 2 years ago, the one that my team resolved cleanly and that is entirely documented. He did not say he would do anything with it. He just mentioned it, by name, with the date. My fist came down on the conference table hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. He threatened you, he implied, Derek said precisely. Very carefully, in a parking garage with no recording equipment and no witnesses. He is too smart to threaten directly. He just wanted me to know that he had something and that he remembered where I kept it. Another pause. And then he smiled and told me to have a good day. I looked at Simone. Her jaw was set in a way that made her look like she was made of something stronger than bone. Derek, she said, her voice crisp and cold. Did he make any reference to Russell Patton? Not in the garage, Derek said, but Russell called me 20 minutes ago. Marcus reached out to him separately, a coffee meeting at the Blue Moon Cafe on North Tryon this morning before 9. Russell said Marcus put a sealed envelope on the table and told him it was compensation for the stress of the situation. He told Russell that good employees sometimes get caught in difficult family matters and that it would be a shame for a promising career to be derailed by something that could easily be resolved quietly. The word quietly hit me like a fist to the chest. I stood up from the table because sitting was not something my body was willing to do anymore. I walked to the window. 12 floors below, Charlotte was going about its Tuesday morning cars, pedestrians, a delivery truck making a left turn. Ordinary people living inside an ordinary day that had no idea any of this was happening. That is attempted bribery and witness intimidation. Simone said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of a woman writing something down in her memory that she intends to use in court. Both are criminal offenses. Derek, did Russell accept the envelope? He said he did not open it, Derek said. He took it because he did not know what else to do in the moment. He still has it. He called me from his car in the parking lot of the cafe. Simone pressed 2 fingers against her temple, closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, and opened them again. Tell Russell to bring that envelope here unopened, she said. Do not let him go back into the bank today. I am calling him directly after this. She turned to look at me. Elliot, I want you to listen to me carefully. I turned from the window. My hands were balled into fists at my sides, and I was having some difficulty unclenching them. This is what desperation looks like, Simone said. Marcus would not be standing in parking garages at 7 in the morning if he felt secure. He is watching his plan unravel, and he is pulling every lever he has left. That is not a sign of strength. That is a sign that he knows exactly how much trouble he is in. Derek, I said, my voice rougher than I wanted it to be. Are you all right? Are you going to be all right? A beat of silence. Then Derek said something that hit me somewhere behind the sternum and stayed there. Elliot. He said, 20 years ago, you did not leave me on a sidewalk in the rain. I want you to understand that I am not leaving you now because some man in a good suit made implications in a parking garage. Whatever Marcus thinks he has on me is documented, resolved, and will not survive daylight. His voice was steady and warm and completely immovable. I am with you, full stop. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment, collecting myself. Same, said Simone crisply, which from her carried the weight of a sworn affidavit. Then we keep going, I said, and my voice came out firmer than anything I had felt since I walked into that bank yesterday morning. We keep going and we do not stop. Simone ended the call, picked up her pen, and looked at me across the table with the expression of a woman who had just decided exactly what kind of fight this was going to be. Russell Patton, she said, is about to make the most important decision of his professional life. And when he makes the right one, and I believe he will, Marcus and Claudia will find out what happens when you underestimate the people you think have no power. She uncapped her pen, and we got back to work. Russell Patton arrived at Simone's office at 10:12 that Tuesday morning, carrying the sealed envelope in his left hand and holding it slightly away from his body, the way a person carries something they are not entirely sure is safe to touch. He was younger looking in the daylight of a conference room than he had seemed in the fluorescent compliance office at the bank, early 30s, with dark circles under his eyes that had deepened overnight, and the particular pallor of someone who had not slept and had been running on coffee and anxiety since before sunrise. He was wearing the same white shirt as yesterday, which told me he had not gone home between leaving the cafe and coming here. Simone stood up when he entered and extended her hand. Russell, she said. Thank you for coming. Sit down. There is coffee. Russell sat. He set the envelope on the table in front of him with both hands, and then pulled those hands back into his lap like he needed to physically separate himself from it. I did not open it, he said, looking at Simone. I want you to know that right away. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, and I did not open it. I know, Simone said. Derek told me. Russell looked at me then. and something crossed his face that was complicated and raw and entirely unguarded, the look of a man who has been carrying something heavy and has finally decided to set it down regardless of what it costs him. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice unsteady at the edges, "I need to tell you that I am sorry. I need to say that first before anything else." My chest tightened. "Russell, please," he said, and his jaw was working hard. "I need to say it. 6 months ago, when those documents came through, I had questions. Real questions. The authorization chain was unusual, not wrong enough to flag automatically, but unusual enough that I noticed. And I asked my supervisor about it, and he told me the paperwork was in order, and the family had specific privacy concerns, and I should process it and move on." He stopped, swallowed. "I moved on, because I have a wife and a 3-year-old and a mortgage, and it was easier to believe that someone above me had checked the things I was worried about." His jaw worked hard against something he was no longer able to hold back. "And then yesterday, I saw you standing in that lobby, and I knew. I have known since yesterday morning that I made the wrong call 6 months ago." The room was very quiet for a moment. Then I leaned forward and said the only thing that felt true. "Russell, you are here now," I said. "That is what matters." He pressed his lips together, hard, nodded once, and straightened in his chair, with the visible effort of a man pulling himself together for something that requires his full attention. "Tell me everything," Simone said, her legal pad open, her pen ready. "From the beginning. Who contacted the bank when what documentation was presented, and who handled each step?" Russell talked for 40 minutes without stopping, except when Simone asked him to repeat something or slow down. He was precise in the way of someone who has been rehearsing this account in his own head since the day before. Dates, document reference numbers, the name of the outside notary, the documents claimed, but whose stamp Simone had already confirmed was invalid, the name of his supervisor, who had co-signed the processing approval. He described how the authorization change had been split across 3 separate processing steps, handled by 3 different employees, so that no single person ever saw the complete picture. He described how each step had been initiated with documentation that looked legitimate at a quick review but fell apart under the kind of scrutiny that only happened when someone was already looking for problems. When he got to the part about Claudia's visits to the bank after hours, his voice dropped. "She came in 4 times between March and August," he said. "Always late in the day after most of the floor staff had left. Always with pre-clearance from the same supervisor. I saw her twice myself. The second time she was at the document management terminal for almost 40 minutes. He looked at Simone directly. "I did not know what she was accessing. I know now that the terminal logs will show it." Simone wrote 3 lines on her legal pad without looking up. "The camera footage Derek has already flagged will corroborate the timing," she said. "The terminal access logs are subpoenable. That is 2 independent chains of evidence for the same 4 visits." She looked up at Russell. "You are a brave man for being in this room today." Russell let out a breath that had clearly been held too long. His shoulders dropped about 2 inches. "What happens to me now?" he asked. "Professionally, I need to know." "You are protected," Simone said without hesitation. "Federal whistleblower protections under the Dodd-Frank Act specifically cover bank employees who report financial fraud. I will have a letter documenting your cooperation and your protected status to you by end of business today. No one can touch your job for what you have done in this room." She paused. "And Russell, your supervisor who co-signed those approvals, is going to have some very difficult questions to answer in the coming weeks. I want you to be prepared for that." Russell nodded slowly. Then he pushed the sealed envelope across the table toward Simone. "I think that belongs in evidence," he said. Simone picked it up, initialed the seal without breaking it, and dropped it into a clear plastic document sleeve with the efficiency of a woman who had been building cases for 30 years and knew exactly what went where. "It does," she said. "Thank you, Russell." He stood up to leave, and at the door he turned back and looked at me one more time with those tired, red-rimmed eyes. "Mr. Vance," he said quietly, "I hope you get everything back." My throat closed up completely. I managed a nod, and he was gone. 2 days after everything happened at the bank, I drove out to Frank Dobbins's house on the eastern edge of Charlotte. I had called ahead. His voice on the phone had something in it that I could not identify from a distance. Not the shame of Thursday's call 2 weeks ago, and not the lighter relief of the morning I had stood outside the bank and told him not to worry. Something else. Something that made me keep the call short and say I would be there at 2 o'clock. The house was a modest colonial on a street of modest colonials, the kind of neighborhood that had been built in the 70s and had aged gracefully because the people in it had taken care of things. Frank's yard was neat. Linda's rose bushes along the front fence were doing exactly what Linda's rose bushes always did, blooming with a stubbornness that suggested they had not gotten the message that it was already September. I had always liked those roses. They had the same quality as their owner, cheerful, persistent, impossible to discourage. Frank opened the door before I knocked. He had clearly been watching for my car. He looked terrible. 2 days of poor sleep had carved new lines around his eyes, and there was a tightness in the set of his mouth that I recognized as the specific expression of a man who has been holding something difficult since before I arrived. "Come in," he said. "I made coffee. I don't know if I can drink any more of it, but I made it anyway." We sat at the kitchen table, which had been the site of 40 years of conversations between us. Card games, arguments about football, the long, quiet afternoon after his father's funeral, when we had sat there for 3 hours and barely said 20 words, and that had been exactly right. The table was old and slightly uneven on one leg, and Frank had been meaning to fix it since approximately 2009. He put his phone on the table between us and did not touch his coffee. "I found something," he said. "2 days ago, right after you called me from the bank parking lot to tell me what had happened. I went back through my phone because I was trying to understand why the bank had been on my case so hard about that loan, and I found something that I should have shown you the minute I found it, and I didn't because I needed a few days to understand what it meant and whether I was reading it right." He pushed the phone toward me. "Read the messages from Marcus. Start from the top." I picked up the phone. The thread began 6 weeks before Frank had called me. Marcus had initiated it, a casual check-in, the kind a man sends to maintain the appearance of being a considerate son's family friend. "How are you, Frank? How is Linda doing? Heard the construction market has been rough lately. Hope you're hanging in there." The tone was warm and easy and completely calculated. And then 3 weeks later, a message that landed differently. Marcus mentioning almost in passing that he had heard First Meridian Bank was tightening enforcement on overdue commercial loans, that it was a tough environment for contractors with variable cash flow, that he hoped Frank's situation was not going to be complicated by the timing. He did not offer help. He did not suggest anything. He simply named the problem with the precision of a man who knew exactly what the problem was because he had access to information he should not have been using. I set the phone down on the table. My hands were steady, which surprised me because the thing moving through my chest was not steady at all. "He knew about your loan," I said. Frank's eyes went red at the rims immediately. "He had to have looked at my account," he said, his voice cracking open on the last word. "Both me and the company bank at First Meridian. He had to have pulled up my information somehow. And then he nudged me. He didn't offer help. He just made sure I was scared enough to call you." Frank pressed the back of his hand against his mouth hard. "Elliot, I handed you right to them. I didn't know. I swear to God I did not know he was doing that, but I handed you right to them, and they were standing there waiting when you walked through that door." His voice broke completely on the last sentence, and he dropped his head forward, shoulders shaking, one hand gripping the edge of the uneven table so hard his knuckles went white. "Frank." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "Look at me." He looked up. His eyes were full and spilling over, and he looked absolutely wretched, the way a good man looks when he has been used as a tool against someone he loves. "None of this is on you," I said. "Not one single thing. Marcus used you. He used your friendship with me and your love for this house and Linda's health and 40 years of trust to move me exactly where he needed me to be. That is on him. That is entirely and completely on him." "I should have known," Frank said, his voice thick. "How?" I said. "How would you have known? You got a few text messages from a man you had known since he was a kid in a hard hat. You had no reason to read anything into that." "None." Frank wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand and let out a long, shuddering breath. "What do we do with it?" he said, nodding at the phone. "Simone Arquette is going to want to see every one of those messages," I said. "Text messages are admissible evidence in North Carolina courts. What Marcus did using his access to bank data to identify your financial vulnerability and manipulate the timing of your distress call, that is an abuse of his position that the court is going to want to hear about." I squeezed his hand once before pulling back. "You are not a victim in this story, Frank. You are a witness, and your testimony is going to matter." Frank straightened up, slowly wiped his face one more time, and reached for his coffee with a hand that had finally stopped shaking. "Then I will testify," he said, and his voice had found its bottom again, rough but solid. "Whatever you need, whatever Simone needs, I will be there." I looked at my oldest friend across that uneven kitchen table in the house that Linda's roses guarded from the front, and felt something shift inside my chest that I had not felt since I walked into that bank 2 days ago. Not hope exactly. Something quieter and more durable than hope. The knowledge that I was not standing alone. 3 weeks had passed since the slap. 3 weeks since I had walked out of First Meridian Bank with my hand still stinging and my pride shattered. Now I sat in Simone's office with my fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug I hadn't touched, watching the morning sun cut sharp angles across her conference table. "Elliot," Simone said, pushing a manila folder across the polished wood, "before you open that, I need you to brace yourself." My chest tightened the way it used to when Eleanor's doctor would walk into a waiting room with that look, that careful, measured expression that meant the news was heavy. I set down my mug and pulled the folder toward me. "What is this?" I asked, even though my hands had already started to tremble. "It's security footage," Simone said. "Subpoenaed yesterday afternoon from 2 locations, First Meridian Bank's back office hallway and the Vance Development Group server room on Fairview Road. We had a digital forensics specialist authenticate both files this morning. Federal Rules of Evidence Rule 901 chain of custody is ironclad." I opened the folder. Inside were printed still frames, time-stamped, grainy but unmistakable. Marcus in a gray suit jacket. Claudia beside him, her dark hair pulled back tight. Both of them leaning over a monitor, a document spread across the desk. "That's Marcus." My voice cracked on his name. "That's my son." "Yes," Simone said, and her voice carried no cruelty, only the weight of truth. The timestamp reads August 14th at 9:47 p.m., 12 days before the bank incident. He and Claudia were in the records room at VDG headquarters after hours using an administrator login that belonged to your former assistant, who retired in 2022. They used Barbara's login. My jaw tightened until I felt the muscles ache. She's been gone 3 years. They never deactivated it. Simone tapped a second still frame. "This one is from the bank's internal hallway camera, same week, August 17th. Claudia is handing a sealed envelope to a notary service courier. The envelope matches the dimensions of the power of attorney document we've been tracking." A sound escaped my throat that I couldn't name, not quite a sob, not quite a groan, somewhere between the two. I pressed my knuckles against my mouth and stared at Marcus's face frozen in that grainy image. He looked so calm, so deliberate. My son, who used to climb onto my lap during thunderstorms and whisper that he wasn't scared because I was there. My son. The door swung open, and Derek Holloway stepped in, carrying a laptop under his arm and breathing like he'd taken the stairs 2 at a time. His tie was loose, his face flushed. "I got the second file," Derek said, setting the laptop on the table and spinning it to face us. The forensics team just confirmed the metadata was altered. The document's original creation date was August 3rd. Someone edited it on August 14th at 10:22 p.m., 35 minutes after the footage shows them in that room. My heart slammed against my ribs. That's the night of the power of attorney. Exactly, Derek said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Claudia's fingerprints aren't on the original, but the edited version, the one presented to us at the bank, shows keystroke patterns that match her work laptop. The IT forensic report is 12 pages. It's clean. It'll hold up. Simone's expression didn't soften, but something fierce moved behind her eyes. "Elliot, this is what we needed. The altered document, the after-hours access, the courier exchange, it builds the timeline. Claudia isn't just a participant. She designed this." My throat burned, and my eyes stung with a heat I hadn't felt since the day I scattered Eleanor's ashes over the creek at Freedom Park. I stood up because sitting still had become unbearable. I walked to the window and looked out at the Charlotte skyline, the cranes, the glass towers, the infrastructure I'd spent 40 years helping build, and I asked myself how a man could do this to his own father. "Is Marcus on camera doing anything directly?" I asked, my back still to them. "Yes." Derek's voice was quieter now. He signed off on the access log. His digital signature authorized the administrator session at 9:31 p.m. He knew exactly what was happening in that room, Elliot. I turned around. My eyes were burning. My hands were shaking. But my voice, when it came, was steady, the kind of steady that comes not from calm, but from something much older and harder than calm. "What do we do with this?" Simone was already writing. "We file a motion to submit the footage as evidence. We attach the forensics report. We file simultaneously with the fraud complaint that Derek's compliance team submitted to the North Carolina Banking Commission last week. By Friday, Marcus and Claudia will receive formal notice." "And if they try to destroy more records?" I asked. "We requested an emergency preservation order yesterday afternoon," Simone said without looking up. "Any further alterations to VDG records now constitute criminal obstruction. They touch a single file, they walk straight into a federal charge." Derek leaned forward and rested his forearms on the table. His voice dropped to something almost personal. "Mr. Vance Elliott, I've worked in banking for 19 years. I've seen fraud schemes. I've seen elder financial abuse cases. I've seen families torn apart by greed. But I have never seen a case come together this cleanly." He paused, jaw tight. "They got sloppy because they thought you wouldn't fight back." Something hot and fierce climbed up my chest. "They were wrong. They were very wrong," Derek said. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt a shred of something I had nearly forgotten. Not quite hope, something rawer than that. Something that tasted like justice getting closer. Simone closed her notepad. "We have one more piece to lock in before the hearing. I received a call this morning from someone who says she has more than what she told you in the park." I felt my breath stop. "Peggy," Simone nodded, her expression measured. "She didn't just overhear a conversation, Elliot. She kept notes." Peggy Caldwell arrived at Simone's office looking exactly the way she always did, sensible navy blazer, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a canvas tote bag hanging from one shoulder. But she wasn't the soft-spoken neighbor who used to bring me zucchini bread over the fence. Her eyes were sharp. Her chin was set. She walked in like a woman who had decided something and wasn't changing her mind. "Elliot," she said. And the moment she saw my face, her own expression crumpled for just a second before she pulled it back together. "Lord, you look like you haven't slept in a month." "I haven't," I admitted. She reached into her canvas tote and pulled out a pale green spiral notebook, the kind you'd find in a drugstore checkout line, the kind you'd never look at twice. She set it on Simone's conference table like she was placing something sacred. 31 years as a legal secretary," Peggy said. "You learn real fast that memory doesn't hold up in a courtroom. Paper does." She tapped the cover. "I started writing things down the day I overheard Marcus and Claudia in the Whitmore parking lot. That was June 4th. I've got 14 entries." Simone picked up the notebook with both hands. Her eyes moved fast, scanning. "These are time-stamped. Date, time, location, weather, what I was wearing, what I heard, who else was present. The way my old boss used to say it, a note written at the time of observation carries more weight than recollection. These are contemporaneous records." Peggy's voice was measured, but her hands gripped the strap of her tote so tightly, her knuckles had gone pale. "I know what these could mean for Marcus. I know he's your son, Elliot, and Lord help me, I wish I wasn't sitting here. But I'm 63 years old, and I've watched too many good people get steamrolled by people who counted on silence. I'm not going to be silent." My throat closed so completely, I had to breathe through my nose for a moment. A burning started behind my eyes. Peggy had known my Eleanor, had come to her funeral, had stood at my fence for 20 years and watched my family grow. And now she was sitting here holding the one thing that could save me because she had trusted paper over memory and decency over comfort. "Peggy," I managed, and my voice broke clean in two. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," she said, and now her own eyes were glistening. "You just make sure Eleanor would be proud of what comes next." Simone was already on her phone. "I need to reach Judge Patricia Harmon's clerk before noon. These contemporaneous records qualify as documentary evidence under Federal Rule 803-1, present sense impression. Combined with the CCTV forensics, we have enough for an emergency evidentiary hearing this afternoon." She looked up. "Elliot, I need you to be there." "I'll be there," I said. The Mecklenburg County Courthouse sat on East Trade Street the way it always had, solid, stone-faced, indifferent to the people who streamed in and out of it every day. I had passed that building 100 times in 40 years, without once imagining I would walk through those doors to fight my own son. My legs felt heavy on the courthouse steps. My heart felt heavier. Derek met us in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, his collar buttoned tight, a hard-sided briefcase at his feet. He looked at me and nodded once, the kind of nod that says everything words can't. "Russell's here," Derek said quietly. "He came voluntarily, no subpoena. He said, and I'm quoting, 'I'm not letting them bury a good man.'" My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with pain. Russell Patton, 34 years old, a bank clerk who could have kept his head down and his job intact, had walked into a courthouse on a Friday afternoon for me. I pressed my hand against my sternum and breathed. The hearing was not of the full trial. Simone explained that on the walk-in, this was a preliminary evidentiary session, a motion to establish the admissibility of the CCTV footage, Peggy's notebook, and Russell's formal statement. The full hearing would follow. But this was the pivot point. This was where the floor either held or gave way. Inside the courtroom, Marcus and Claudia were already at the defense table, with his attorney, a tall, severe woman named Patricia Alcott, in a charcoal suit. Marcus did not look at me when I walked in. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, one hand flat on the table. But I saw it the way his right thumb pressed hard against the wood, pressing and releasing, the small tremor he couldn't control. Claudia sat beside him in a slate gray blazer. She looked at me. Her expression didn't waver. But her left foot shifted under the table and I caught the movement, a heel lifting, falling, lifting. The body always tells the truth, even when the face won't. Judge Patricia Harmon entered at 2:07 p.m., and the room rose. She was a woman in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair cut short, and eyes that suggested she had seen every variety of human behavior and was surprised by none of it. She settled her reading glasses on her nose and looked at the documents already spread before her. "Counsel," she said, "we are here on an emergency motion regarding admissibility. Ms. Arquette, you may proceed." Simone stood. "Your Honor, the plaintiff presents 3 categories of evidence: authenticated CCTV footage with forensic metadata analysis, establishing document alteration, contemporaneous handwritten records, maintained by a witness over a period of 15 weeks, and a voluntary eyewitness statement from a former bank employee. We argue that taken together, these materials establish probable cause for elder financial fraud under North Carolina General Statute 14-112.2 and wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343. I watched Marcus's attorney lean in and whisper something sharp into Marcus's ear. Marcus shook his head just slightly. That thumb kept pressing against the table. Judge Harmon was reading. The courtroom breathed carefully around her. Peggy sat in the gallery, to my left, her canvas tote on her lap, her spine straight. Derek was to my right, unmoving. Russell Patton sat 3 rows back, hands clasped, eyes forward. Judge Harmon looked up. "Mr. Whitfield, does the defense dispute the chain of custody for the CCTV materials?" Grant Whitfield stood. "Your Honor, the defense requests additional time to review the forensic." "The subpoena was issued 4 days ago," Judge Harmon said, and her tone was the kind that ends sentences. "Chain of custody documentation was provided. The motion to admit is granted." She turned to the next page. "Ms. Caldwell's contemporaneous records, 14 entries dated and signed. Rule 803, one of the North Carolina Rules of Evidence, is satisfied. Admitted." Another page. "Mr. Patton's voluntary statement, sworn notarized, submitted in compliance with Dodd-Frank whistleblower protections. Admitted." She set down her glasses and looked at the defense table. "Counsel, your client has until Monday morning to respond to the full fraud complaint. This court will convene for the principal hearing on Thursday, October 2nd. She gathered her papers. "We are adjourned." The gavel came down. I sat very still for a moment. The sound of it, that single clean crack of wood, went through me from crown to sole. My hands were trembling on my knees. My eyes were burning so badly I had to press 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathe. 40 years of building. 40 years of trusting. 1 summer of watching it all crumble. And now in a courtroom on East Trade Street on a Friday afternoon, the floor had held. Simone touched my arm. "We're not done," she said, "but we're standing." I nodded. My voice wasn't ready yet. Somewhere across the aisle I heard Marcus's chair scrape back, and I heard his footsteps move toward the door, quick-clipped, the walk of a man trying to outpace something he couldn't outrun. I didn't turn to watch him go. I looked at Peggy instead. She was pressing her fingertips hard against her mouth, eyes brimming, nodding at me the way Eleanor used to when she wanted to say, "I'm proud of you," without making a scene. Something split open in my chest, not painfully, but completely, and I felt the first real breath I had drawn in 3 weeks fill my lungs all the way down. Thursday, October 2nd. That was the day everything would either be taken from me forever or given back. Thursday arrived, the way all the hardest days do, quietly, without fanfare. Just gray morning light pressing through the curtains, and the smell of old coffee going cold on the kitchen counter. I put on the same charcoal suit I had worn to Eleanor's funeral, because it was the only suit I owned that felt serious enough for what was about to happen. I knotted my tie 3 times before my hands steadied enough to get it right. I was at the courthouse by 8:15. Simone was already there, standing in the hallway outside courtroom 4B with a travel mug in one hand and her trial binder tucked under her arm. And when she saw me, her eyes moved over my face in that quick, clinical way she had, checking me the way a pilot checks instruments before takeoff. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Ask me again tonight," I said. She almost smiled. "Fair enough. Derek and Russell are already inside. Peggy is in the gallery. Frank called this morning. He wants to be here." My throat tightened. "Frank doesn't need to be here for this." "No," Simone said quietly. "But he wants to be. That man loves you, Elliot. Let him." I nodded. My jaw ached from clenching it all night. Inside the courtroom, the gallery was fuller than I had expected. People from the bank. A woman from the North Carolina Banking Commission who had been copied on the fraud complaint. Two reporters seated at the far end, notebooks open. And near the back, Frank Dobbins in a brown corduroy jacket that he had worn to every important occasion I had ever seen him attend, his big weathered hands folded on his knees, his eyes finding mine the moment I walked through the door. He raised one hand in a slow, steady wave. My chest ached straight through. Marcus and Claudia were already at the defense table. Marcus had Patricia Alcott with him, the attorney I had seen at his side in the preliminary hearing, composed and severe as ever. Claudia sat perfectly composed in a burgundy blazer, and only the way she turned a pen end over end between her fingers betrayed anything beneath the surface. Judge Patricia Harmon entered at 9 sharp. The room rose, settled, and the day began. The morning was Simone's. She walked Judge Harmon through the evidence in layers. First, the CTV footage played on a court monitor, the timestamp running in the lower corner, as Marcus and Claudia bent over that screen in the dark records room. This was a bench trial, the judge alone deciding, but 3 court officers leaned forward to watch. I kept my eyes on my hands folded on the table because I could not watch my son's face on that screen and hold myself together at the same time. Then Derek Holloway took the stand. He sat straight, both hands flat on the railing, and his voice carried without effort. Simone walked him through everything: the day of the slap, the forged authorization, the compliance hold, the signature comparison analysis. But it was when Simone asked him about the parking garage confrontation that the room shifted. "Mr. Holloway," Simone said, "in the days following the evidentiary hearing on September 19th, did anyone approach you regarding your testimony?" Derek's jaw tightened. "Yes. On September 22nd, Marcus Vance approached me in the parking structure attached to the First Meridian Bank building on North Tryon at approximately 7:40 a.m. And what did he say? He said, and I'll use his exact words because I wrote them down that evening. He said, 'Derek, you've built a solid career here. 19 years is a long time. It would be a shame if someone started pulling threads on that internal audit from 2023. You remember the one.' Then he said, 'Think carefully about what you're prepared to say under oath.'" A sound moved through the gallery, not loud, just a ripple of exhaled breath. My hands gripped the table edge hard enough that my knuckles went white. Simone had told me about this. I had known it was coming. And still hearing it spoken aloud in a court of law, in the voice of a man I had once trusted completely, made the blood drain from my face. Simone turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff submits Mr. Holloway's contemporaneous written record of this exchange dated September 22nd as evidence of witness tampering under 18 U.S.C. 1512. Patricia Alcott was on her feet. "Objection, hearsay. It is a verbal threat communicated directly to the witness," Simone said without raising her voice. "It qualifies as a verbal act, not hearsay. The note is a present-sense impression under Rule 800-3-1. Judge Harmon looked at it for 6 seconds. Admitted. Continue. Russell Patton took the stand at 11:14. He was pale, and his hands were clasped so tightly in his lap I could see the tension in his forearms from across the room. But his voice did not waver. "Mr. Patton," Simone said, Were you approached by anyone connected to this case regarding your testimony? Yes, ma'am. Russell cleared his throat. On September 21st, I received a sealed envelope at my home address. The same address listed in the bank's HR system, which someone had clearly accessed without authorization. Inside was a cashier's check for $12,000 and a handwritten note that said, "Reconsider your statement. This is appreciation, not a request." There was no signature. And what did you do with the envelope? Russell looked directly at me for the first time that morning. His eyes were red at the corners. I called Ms. Arquette, and then I called Detective Samuels at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and filed a report for attempted bribery. The courtroom did not erupt. It went very, very still, the kind of still that is louder than noise. Then Simone said, "Your Honor, the plaintiff submits the cashier's check bank traced to a personal account held by Claudia Vance as Exhibit 14. Claudia's pen stopped moving between her fingers. It dropped onto the table with a small, clean sound. The afternoon belonged to Frank. He hadn't been subpoenaed. Simone had asked if he was willing, and he had said yes before she finished the sentence. He walked to the stand slowly, that weathered corduroy jacket, his big hands wrapping around the railing like he was steadying himself against a current. "Mr. Dobbins," Simone said gently, "in late August of this year, did you make a phone call to Elliot Vance?" "I did," Frank said, and his voice scraped rough. "I called Elliot because my wife Linda and I were facing foreclosure. Medical bills. I had nowhere else to turn. And after that call, did anything unusual happen?" Frank swallowed hard. His eyes brimmed. 2 weeks later, after all this came out, I went back through my call log. Found a number I didn't recognize that had called me 2 days before I called Elliot. When I traced it, it came back to a prepaid number registered to a business address belonging to one of Elliot's shell company properties. Frank's voice broke completely on the last word. Whoever it was already knew I was in trouble. They called me first, and then they waited for me to call Elliot. I pressed my fist against my mouth. My eyes burned so badly, the room blurred at the edges. Frank was weeping openly on the stand, big heaving breaths that shook his shoulders, and every person in that gallery understood what he was saying. Marcus had not simply reacted to Frank's distress call. He had tracked it. He had perhaps even anticipated it. He had used an old man's desperation as a key to get to me. "Mr. Dobbins," Simone said quietly, "what do you want the court to understand today?" Frank wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at me, not at the judge, not at the gallery, at me. "Elliot Vance gave me my first job in 1987, he said. "When my father died and I had nothing, he gave me work, and he never once made me feel small for needing it. That's the man sitting at that table. That's the man someone decided to destroy." His voice cracked wide open. "I'm just sorry I didn't know my phone call was going to be the door they walked through." I could not speak. I could not move. I sat there with tears running unchecked down my face, and I didn't try to stop them, because some truths are too large and too old to be held behind dry eyes. Judge Harmon called a recess at 2:30. She returned at 4:15. The gallery held its breath. Having reviewed all submitted evidence, Judge Harmon said, "This court finds sufficient grounds for a judgment in favor of the plaintiff under North Carolina General Statute 14-112.2. The power of attorney dated August 14th is declared void. All property transfers executed under its authority are reversed. Asset freeze on accounts held by Stonecroft Holdings, LLC, and Meridian Build Partners, LLC, both shell entities linked to Marcus Vance, is ordered effective immediately." She set down her papers. "Regarding the criminal referrals for wire fraud, elder financial abuse, witness tampering, and attempted bribery, these matters are referred to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office and the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina." She looked at Marcus directly. "This court is adjourned," The gavel fell at 4:47 p.m. I sat there for a long moment, while the room moved around me. Simone was gathering her papers. Derek was exhaling slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. Russell had his face in his hands. And across the aisle I heard Marcus's attorney speaking to him in a low, rapid voice, and then I heard Marcus for the first and only time that day make a sound that cut straight through me. He said, "Dad," just that. One word. Barely above a whisper. Cracked and raw and too late. I did not turn around. I pressed my hands flat on the table, breathed through my nose, and let Simone put her hand on my arm and walk me out of that courtroom and into the light. I slept for 11 hours the night after the verdict. I hadn't done that since Eleanor was alive. When I woke, the morning light was coming through the curtains, the way it always had, the same pale gold, the same angle across the bedroom floor. For a moment, the world felt ordinary again. Then I remembered everything, and it felt extraordinary instead. Simone called at 9. I was at the kitchen table with a real cup of coffee, the kind I actually tasted. "It's official," she said, and I could hear the quiet satisfaction in her voice the way you hear sunlight through a window. The asset freeze executed at 8 this morning. Stonecroft Holdings Meridian Build Partners locked. The DA's office confirmed the criminal referral. Elliot, the properties Marcus transferred, are coming back. My hand tightened on the mug. All of them. All of them. The Miami collateral, the Fairview Road holdings, the trust assets Eleanor set aside. Every transfer made under that void power of attorney is being unwound. She paused. It's not instant. A few months through the courts, but it's done. They can't touch it now. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum because something inside me was breaking and healing at the exact same moment, and I didn't have a word for that. "Simone," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "How do I come back from something like that?" "You already did," she said quietly. "You came back the morning you walked into Derek's office and didn't walk out." 3 days later, Derek came to the house with a folder and 2 sandwiches from the deli on Providence Road. He sat at my kitchen table and slid a single-page document across to me, a preliminary proposal for a nonprofit entity. I looked at the name at the top. The Eleanor Vance Foundation. My throat locked completely. "Community financial literacy and legal aid," Derek said, leaning forward, eyes bright with something earnest and urgent. "Free legal consultations, power of attorney workshops, and early detection hotlines specifically for elderly residents vulnerable to financial exploitation. What happened to you happens every single day to people who have nobody, Elliot. No Simone, no Peggy, no one." No, I stared at his face. 20 years ago, I had pulled this man from a burning car on I-485 without knowing his name, without expecting a single thing in return. And here he was, 20 years later, wanting to spend the rest of his career making sure it never happened to someone else. My eyes filled. I let them. "You want to run it?" I asked, barely above a whisper. His face broke into the smile, wide and real and completely unguarded. "If you'll have me." "Derek," I said, "I would be honored." We shook hands across my kitchen table, and it felt more significant than any contract I had ever signed. That Saturday, Peggy came by without calling ahead the way she always did. She found me in the backyard pulling dead leaves from Eleanor's rose bushes. 3 of them were blooming late-season deep red against the October air. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and held it out. Her handwriting was small and precise, the handwriting of a woman who had spent 30 years writing things that mattered. October 3rd, 2025. Elliot Vance won. Not because he was powerful, not because he was loud. He won because the people he had been quietly good to for 40 years refused to let him lose. That's not luck. That's a life well lived. I folded it carefully and placed it in my breast pocket, right over my heart. When Peggy put her hand on my arm, I covered it with mine and held on. "Thank you," I said, "for all of it." "Oh, hush," she said, but there was a single tear tracking down her cheek and she didn't bother wiping it. The foundation launched on a Saturday in mid-November in a rented hall in South End. Frank and Linda Dobbins were there. Russell Patton came with his wife. I walked to the front of the room, put both hands on the podium, and said, "My wife Eleanor used to say a building is only as strong as what you pour into its foundation." She was talking about concrete, but she was also talking about everything else. The Eleanor Vance Foundation exists because kindness is not weakness, because the quiet things we do for one another, the warnings we give, the stands we take, those things compound over time. They build something no court can seize and no fraud can transfer. I paused. My eyes were full, but my voice was clear. Take care of each other. That is the whole sermon. Outside afterward, the November sky was the deep, clear blue that only comes after a long storm has passed. I stood on the steps with Peggy's note resting over my heart, and I thought, Eleanor, I think I finally got it right. The Eleanor Vance Foundation opened to the public on November 17th, 2025. In its first 30 days, it served 41 families in Mecklenburg County. Elliot Vance never stopped building. I am 68 years old, and I have lived long enough to know that pride can blind a man faster than any darkness. Looking back, I made every mistake a father can make. I handed my son the keys to everything I had built and told myself that trust was the same thing as love. It is not. Love watches. Love asks questions. Love does not sign papers it hasn't read simply because the hand holding them belongs to family. Don't be like me. Read what you sign. Know where your assets stand. And when someone who loves you, a neighbor, an old friend, a quiet voice at the fence tries to warn you, put down your pride and listen. I believe God places certain people in our path not by accident, but by design. Derek Holloway was in my life for 20 years before either of us understood why. That is not coincidence. That is grace. My personal conviction is simple. A family story is never just about blood. It is about who shows up when everything is on the line. The people who saved me were not all family by name, but every single one of them was family by choice. These are the grandpa stories I will carry to my last day, not the buildings, not the balance sheets, but the people who refused to let me fall. If something in this family story moved you, if even one moment felt familiar, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and stay with this channel because the next story is already waiting for you. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A gentle heads up, the stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted purely to carry a message worth hearing. If that's not your cup of tea, no hard feelings, step away and find what speaks to you. But if you're still here, welcome. Let's keep going.